Okay, so Polestar's been around the block a few times. It began tuning Volvos back in the day, faster than they have any business being. Then the Polestar 1, then the Polestar 2, and finally here in front of us, the Polestar 3. It was only inevitable that they were gonna join the crowds of EV SUVs, but I can't be the only one that hopes that time was spent to create something a little bit more special than we're used to. So let's go for a drive and find out.
Before we hit the track and find out if it's even worth our time trying to slam curbs with 5,800 pounds of Swedish luxury, let's hit the road. All right, you guys, Polestar 3 Performance model, 517 horsepower, 671 pound-feet of torque, which if we just punch it for a second there, it's not bad. It's a ton of power. I was just driving the ZDX last week. Similar power levels here, but of course, any EV, the uphill battle is the weight. This is about 2.5 tons. So there is quite a bit of curb weight to toss around here. Standard all-wheel drive here in Canada. You are able to spec a 2-wheel drive model only in the States. The big trick here, you guys, is the real torque vectoring rear differential, which is huge. So of the torque that's being sent to the rear, it is able to distribute that torque between the left and right wheels in combination with, of course, brake-based torque vectoring. So you do get a ton of grip. And in our drive modes, we can select different steering weights. Now, I will say the firm setting in this car is almost like a light setting in most other cars. It is incredibly light, but it makes sense for a vehicle like this. Standard here, of course, is air suspension as well. So the vehicle in off-road mode, we did an off-road section that will raise up the vehicle slightly. It's got hill descent control with that, and then it will lower back down when you're on the street. One button press and the rear lowers to make loading easier. And yes, I can probably count on one hand how many future Polestar 3 owners will dare drive on anything rougher than a dirt road, but I figured we'd try living like the 1% anyways. Hill descent control is automatic and seamless, and our distance to the front bumper is actually relayed onto the screen in real time, helping to keep the bodywork unscathed. Here you can see that wheel in the air braking, trying so hard to send torque to the other wheel. This was just a ton of fun, great articulation, competitive approach and departure angles, and it just felt smooth the whole way through. While it leans towards luxury, it's good knowing you'll be able to lean on it in other scenarios too. Back on the road, we've got 3 suspension settings, very subtle in difference, but firm is useful if you want a bit more connection. The air suspension, phenomenal. I think it performs better than the ZDX. Absolutely. It's a little more supple, a little bit more soft. A lot of the small stuff still comes through the steering wheel. Like I was saying, you do get somewhat decent road feel through the steering, which, you know, I've just kind of resigned myself to the fact that most EVs don't do that. But when it does happen, like in the Polestar 3 here, I notice it. Heads-up display is standard. Heated seats are standard. Optional heated rear seats, and we have a ton of adjustability. This one with the performance pack does get massage seats, no butt massage though. It's a bit of a miss. Adjustable bolsters and everything. Really comfortable seats. They are similar to what you'd find in an XC90, which I love. Those are absolutely some of my favorite seats, bar none of any SUV I've driven. So, and we do have 2 screens here. A really small one in the center display here, but I don't know how Polestar did this. They were able to squeeze Google Maps onto the center display here. They have changed up a few things on the interior as far as ergonomics. So your gear selector is up here on the column. That's not a big deal, but they've put a lot of stuff into the screen, I guess is what I'm trying to say. To open the glove box, there's a button on the screen. You either have to dig for it, or if you've used it recently, it'll show up on this bottom row of recently used apps. That's a bit frustrating. And then of course you have your mirror controls that are not on the inside of the door. So you have to go into the menu to change your mirrors. Could be a little bit distracting when you're trying to keep your eyes on the road. Small things like that make the interior feel more minimalistic, which is one of the Polestar 3's, as far as design goes, one of its greatest assets, but at the same time, it causes a little bit of frustration. There's a little bit of a learning curve for some of that stuff here on the road. If you don't need 37 ambient lighting options, 9 ways to configure the gauge cluster, and 6 different fake sounds coming through the speakers, this is the place to be. The steering wheel's great, minus the touch button learning curve, and the center display is a massive 14.5 inches. Most of the climate control has dedicated real estate, but options like fan speed and AC are still a couple taps away, just a consequence of making the interior look as minimalist and simple as they possibly could. They did give us a dedicated volume knob though. This system has Polestar's Android software built in, which should be familiar if you've been in any Polestar or Volvo product in the last couple of years. It makes it easy to both use apps you're used to, but also find charging stations through Google Maps, which is native to the system. Cursed are the manufacturers trying to hold on to their own dedicated navigation systems. I'll say it again, these seats are amazing, and poking around, the jump in quality and feel over the Polestar 2 is obvious and welcome. This one's also been fitted with the 25-speaker Bowers & Wilkins audio system with Dolby Atmos and the panoramic glass roof.
All right, so Polestar 3 has a range of 506 kilometers for the standard dual motor all-wheel drive, 449 kilometers. For the performance model that's in front of us here is a 111 kilowatt hour battery with a max charging speed of 250 kilowatts. I'll say it once, I'll say it again. Check your local charging infrastructure. Around here in Vancouver, I have never seen a vehicle charging at 250 kilowatts. Maybe Toronto, New York, LA, it's a different story. But here in Vancouver, you're lucky to get up to 150 to 200 kilowatts of charging speed. That's been my experience. It'll get better in the future, but that's just the situation right now. It is a small SUV. It has this sloped back, not quite as sloped as something like the Volvo C40 was. Up front here, they've done a lot in terms of aerodynamics. So this front splitter here is kind of cool. It looks like part of the car, like there's no kind of gap there from afar, and then you get closer and you can see, yeah, they've put a lot of thought into making it as efficient as possible. Something new for Polestar are these door handles that sit flush with the car. Again, aerodynamics. In car, I mentioned the frameless mirrors. I love that. It's one of those small details that Polestar includes. And I've never been in a Polestar product that has soft closed doors. So yeah, for the starting price here, $93,000 Canadian or $73,000 USD, you're getting a lot of standard features. You do get standard all-wheel drive for that. And I have spec'd one up online to about $120,000 Canadian or about 97,000 US. And you could add more onto that. So it can get expensive if you add things like massage seats, if you add the heated rear seats. But a lot of this stuff is standard 360 cam. This vehicle does weigh about 5,700 pounds, which I will add is about 300 pounds lighter than the Acura ZDX I was in last week. So a little bit lighter. The ZDX does have a little bit more cargo space in the back, but of course this is a smaller vehicle. It is about 10 inches longer in wheelbase than the Polestar 2, so I would take that into consideration. But the trick here is Polestar's put a ton of effort and focus into the driving dynamics. So as I mentioned, it has a real torque vectoring rear differential, which is huge. Even if it's just in the background and you're not really thinking about it, it's there, it's putting in work.
And when it's not putting in work, throw it in range mode, and the rear motor disconnects to get you as far as possible. It's tough to miss those massive 22-inch forged alloy wheels and Swedish gold Brembo 4-piston brakes you get with the performance pack, and of course, the matching seat belts. Other than that, it's fairly tough to tell the difference between the two, which I love. Stepping back, I think it's a great looking SUV, especially from the rear quarter panels. Edgy? No, but it's certainly not lacking presence. But how was it on the track? I'm not gonna lie, a 5,800 pound electric SUV wouldn't have been my first choice to throw around Vancouver Island Motorsports Circuit, but think of this just as a lifted luxury wagon or hatchback. That's what it feels like. You can clearly see it required some finesse for me, definitely rewarding smooth inputs over aggressive commands, not something like a Lotus Elise or Exige or MX-5 that you could just kind of tossed back side to side with little to no repercussions. It's still leaning a fair bit corner to corner, but that's what I want. A little bit of roll helped bring more feedback through the tires and the steering wheel. The torque just punches you in a straight line. I promise you 671 pound-feet is enough, but that wasn't the highlight for me. That's easy, right? What's not easy is rolling into the power coming out of corners and realizing the vehicle has more grip to give. Power on at the right time, and it didn't get lazy coming out of corners. The rear just stuck, swung around, and made me realize next lap around, I could get on the power even earlier. It just gave me confidence the car wasn't going to suddenly push the front end out wide without notice. There were a couple moments I came in maybe a little bit too hot, causing some understeer, but if I got it right, the front end gripped, the rear wrapped around, and then it was time to punch it.
Overcooked that a little bit. And then stay inside.
All this being said, it's still an incredibly heavy vehicle. What matters though is it masks it well, and this is the challenge for all of these hybrids and EVs that have effectively doubled their curb weight over the past 10 years. If what you're after is a seamless blend of performance, feel, and luxury in a vehicle that's easily going to fit in your underground parking, the Polestar 3 is a real contender.